You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections. You went too fast. I have to tell people they can go back. Thank you. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.boston_MPO.org/MPO_DISCRIMINATION. Next slide, please. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Ethan Lapointe of the MPO staff at elapointe@ctps.org or 857-702-3703 or via the chat box. All participants will join with the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Thank you. And as I said earlier, I am David Moeller. I represent Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt here. Please call the roll.
I will call the roll. MassDOT seat 1.
This is David Moeller. I'm here.
Thank you. MassDOT seat 2.
This is John Bouchard representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, present.
Morning and thank you. MassDOT Highway Division, please. Next, may I call MBTA?
Sandy Johnston, representing General Manager Phil Ang and the MBTA. Good morning.
Good morning. Massport, please.
Good morning. This is Sarah Lee, representing Massport.
Good morning. MAPC? I will return. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning. This is Hannah Switlikowski, Deputy Director, MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning. Advisory Council.
Hunter Diggins, Chair, Advisory Council here. Thank you.
Thank you. City of Boston, BTD.
This is Jenna Rowe, representing Mayor Michelle Wu in the City of Boston.
Hello. City of Boston Planning Department.
This is Matt Moran, representing the City of Boston and Mayor Wu.
Hello. At-large City, City of Everett.
Good morning. Jay Monty, representing Mayor DiMaria in the City of Everett.
Good morning. Next is At-large City, City of Newton.
Good morning. David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
Good morning. At-large Town, Town of Arlington.
John Alessi, representing Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy in the Town of Arlington.
Thank you. At-large Town, Town of Brookline.
Good morning. Erin Chute, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green, Town. Thank you.
Thank you. Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning. Tom Bent, representing Mayor Catiana Ballantyne in the Intercore.
Good morning. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton.
Good morning, Kristen Guichard, representing Acton Select Board Member Fran Arsenal for the Magic Subregion.
Good morning. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham, please.
Dennis Giambetti, representing Mayor Siski and the Metro West region.
Thank you. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly. Next is North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington. Do we have South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull?
Good morning. Chris Diorio representing Hull Select Board Chair Erwin Nessoff.
Good morning. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Rentham. And next is Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood.
Steve Olenoff, Trick Subregion, Town of Norwood.
Thank you. Federal Highway Administration.
Good morning, Ken
Federal
Miller, Federal Highway.
Oh, pardon me, and thank you, Ken. Federal Transit Administration, please. Just going back, have I missed anyone on the roll? Have called MassDOT Highway. Oh, yes, Eric.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Eric Barassa with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to be acknowledged today? With that, I turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one today, so we'll go directly to Tegan's report, Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could go to the next slide. So I'm going to start my Executive Director's report today by mentioning a brief staffing update, which is that we have recently been joined at the agency by Stefan Favo, who's joined us as the website administrator for the MPO. Next slide, please. I also wanted to provide a significant grant update. So as you all know, in 2003, the MPO received a Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary grant for over $2 million to support the development of a Regional Vision Zero action plan. And in May of this year, we applied for a second Safe Streets and Roads for All grant to conduct supplemental planning and demonstration activities to help inform the development of that Regional Vision Zero action plan. And I'm excited to share that we received the news earlier this month that we were awarded the $7.5 million grant, which was the full amount of our request, with the 20% match from MassDOT. That is a $9.3 million grant. The grant has the main goals of the grant are to, as I mentioned, inform the development of the Regional Vision Zero action plan through supporting municipalities and partnering with them to implement quick build traffic calming interventions. And we will couple that with the municipalities with outreach, education, and data collection. So that will help us learn how different traffic calming strategies are accepted and how they perform in various urban and suburban settings around the region. So with that, I just want to emphasize that this is a really immense, I think, benefit and win for the region. And we're very excited to work with our regional partners on this. It's really going to help us foster additional coordination around this grant, as well as, of course, serve the primary goal of enhancing our safety planning efforts. Thank you. So with that, then, we can always come back to answer any questions folks have. I did want to move on to the next slide, which is setting up an announcement that I'd like to spend a couple of slides on as well. So we are announcing to you all, the board, that we have planned a restructuring of the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. As you all know, the council is intended, next slide, please. The council is intended to be a body that works with this board and participates in advancing public engagement in the 3C process. So that description comes from the MOU that you are being asked to consider approving today, which the description of which has been updated to really match the current activities of the advisory council. It's existed in some format since the 70s, and like the MPO staff itself, really helps to elevate diverse perspectives from stakeholders throughout the region. So that's another quote that we pulled from the MOU. Next slide, please. And the updated mission that we put into the MOU is that the advisory council will create a space for knowledge building and productive discussions about regional transportation issues and advise the development of NPO programs and projects to ensure that they're responsive to public priorities. So with that context, next slide, We've been working with advisory council members, especially including leadership, which is of course represented here by Len Diggins as chair of the council, to work on exploring some of the problem statements that we had in terms of achieving that mission. And that has led to the strategy that I'm presenting today. The challenge questions that we addressed are, next please. How do we work with the advisory council? How do we work with the board to ensure that membership is truly diverse and representative of the range of public perspectives in the region, with a particular emphasis that we always have on underrepresented voices? The next challenge question we've been working on together, next please, is how the advisory council can be as supportive as possible of the MPO's engagement program and engagement activities. In the last decade, our work in engagement and the engagement field in general has really evolved significantly, and so has representation on the board. And so we're looking to figure out how to evolve the advisory council alongside that context. And then lastly, and the whole point of this is to ensure, as the advisory council has been interested in, how to have as much of a direct impact as possible on the MPO processes and decision-making. So we carried out some planning and research to support exploring these questions over the last year, and we've talked with the advisory council about our findings from doing peer reviews of other advisory councils and other boards, and the best practices that we learned from that. And that's led us to a strategy that embraces actually a very significant shift and a novel path forward with the advisory council. It will be disruptive in that it will result in a full restructuring of the membership and meeting structure of the advisory council. But we've discussed with membership, and I think there's general collective agreement that there is some work that's needed in this area to be able to address those problem statements. So that means, next slide, that we will plan to wind down this current structure of the advisory council after several more meetings throughout this calendar year. Sorry, it looks like one of the months got left off there. And we will have some focused debriefs with the current membership to do some deeper dives into their experience with engagement and the MPO. And then over several months, we will have a gap between the last meeting with the current structure and the initiation of a new group that's been recruited through a new membership process and with a new meeting plan that achieves the goals that we share. During that time frame, several months of gap, we'll use that to finalize the work plans that we've already been putting together and discussing with the advisory council over the last month. And then when the new group is launched sometime next calendar year, the new group will need to choose its own leadership and define its governance to fully embrace the restructuring. Next slide, please. Actually, sorry, before I get to the intended outcomes, to shorten any gap that we have between an advisory council seat representation on the board, we do propose that the newly elected leadership of RTAC, which will be effective in October, continue to serve on the board for some time during that pause that I mentioned, until it makes sense to make the full shift to the new group. And with members themselves, we're talking with them about if there are concerns about continued engagement with the MPO, either during that gap or after the new group is launched. There are many ways that we can work with them to engage in the MPO process. So we'll work to match their interests to the forums where they can engage. So again, the intended outcomes are to establish a more diverse membership that's representative of the range of public voices in the region, to align the advisory council activities more directly with the engagement program that the MPO engages in, and then have more direct impact by members of the group on MPO processes and decision-making. Then I will finish up my presentation with the current agenda, and then again, I'm happy to go back to any questions. So just today, we have a couple of action items. I already mentioned that the Memorandum of Understanding has gone through a public comment period, and if you so choose, you may vote to approve that new Memorandum of Understanding. And we'll also be asking you to vote on updates to CMAQ mid-performance period performance targets. And then we will have a number of presentations. We'll actually be giving a quarterly engagement update. We'll talk about some of the input we've received from board members and invite additional conversation on potential topics for the annual meeting that's coming up in November. We'll have presentations on the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program, and also a study that has been completed, which is parking in bike lanes, strategies for safety and prevention. Next slide. And the slides are coming up next. We have some different dates in October. Our next meeting will be on October 10th at 10 a.m. So we had shifted the October date to the 10th and the 24th. So I just want to remind you all of that, and so that you can update your calendars accordingly. And then I also want to remind you the date of the annual meeting, which will be November 14th at 10 a.m. And that's it, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan?
Yes.
Ken Miller.
Good morning. Thank you, Tegan. Just a question about the restructuring of the advisory committee. I've always wondered, if the purpose of the advisory committee is to advise the MPO, I've always wondered how, is there a better way to have the advisory committee have the benefit of the discussions that actually happen at the MPO meetings, the presentations and discussions that happen at the MPO meetings, and is there any thought into how to sort of improve that linkage? Because if the purpose is to advise the MPO, then they should know what the MPO is up to, right? And the staff. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ken. And we're absolutely thinking about exactly those kinds of things, how there's a more direct impact. I will say that the advisory council, its structure under Len's leadership over the last number of months, there's been a lot of discussion in the advisory council meetings about the studies as they've been already presented to, the MPO. They tend to happen as an additional conversation after the fact, after they've been presented to the MPO. And so what I think we need to do and work on is how we get sort of more proactive input into the processes and work in plans and studies, and focus on kind of that front-facing, getting input into the process, rather than having it be a group that reviews something after the MPO has sort of reviewed and talked about it. So we're working to really shift that as we go into the next meeting plan and structure. I know staff have already done, my engagement staff have already done a lot of really good thinking on this, and we will kind of refine and reform what that meeting plan looks like, and happy to give updates to this board as we're thinking about what that meeting structure can look like to accomplish that goal.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Lynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question actually is on the Safe Streets for All. I'm pleased to see that you got the additional monies. It seems like a lot of work, and I'm wondering, do we have the capacity, both as the staff, but also the municipalities, to do that work now? And if not, does some of that funding maybe go towards providing, that capacity? I'm thinking mainly people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Lynn, as well. As with the current grants, this level of funding increase results in necessitating hiring of consultants to help support the work. So certainly a lot of that capacity will be channeled through some consultant efforts, but we are also looking at the staff we have on hand and what additional capacity we might need, given that these are multi-year processes. They're not only within a current year. And so we're thinking through some strategies around whether it makes sense to hire people to support these efforts, perhaps on a term basis or otherwise, but we haven't come to any conclusions yet as to how to sort of move forward with that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Jan Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, for Len's question, also announce that Boston also received some Safe Streets for All funding to do similar kind of pilot demonstration activities in the neighborhood of East Boston. While we've already been in touch with staff around these two kind of court-connected efforts, and that they're both following the same kind of set of federal guidance and requirements. Also say that we'd love to kind of find ways to share resources and that we're and kind of share learnings as we kind of move forward with that.
Thank you, Jen. Ken?
Thank you. Not to belabor this at all, but just a caution. We have not yet had our kickoff meeting with either the city or the MPO on these two particular grants yet, but Safe Streets for All, you are required to be direct recipients. This cannot be a pass-through, through MassDOT. So I just want to point out that any improvements, even temporary improvements such as these demonstration projects are required to have NEPA conducted and cleared. And so just want to mention that have you consider that in your thinking of resources that are available, and that MassDOT cannot do that for you. Since you are a direct recipient, they can be helpful, but we have to sign any NEPA document that, meaning Federal Highway, has to actually sign any document. We cannot delegate that to the state. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Anybody else? Any other comments for Tegan at this time? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none. If you want to comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will try to call on you. Next item is committee chairs reports. Are there any?
Mr. Chair, hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. In our last board meeting on August 15th, the revised MOU was released for 21 days of public comment. Staff will summarize the outcomes of that today. The next step will be to obtain board signatures over the next 3 weeks. Where you as board designees require supervisory approval, legal review, please initiate those as soon as possible, and staff will outline the deadlines. We want to make sure we have everything in place for the annual meeting. So if everyone could make sure they get all those signatures back to staff, that'd be great. But thank you.
General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee met last on August 22nd. At that meeting, Ethan shared how staff have been working to really respond to this board's request for some additional detailed, timely information, mostly in 2 scenarios that we've seen play out both this past spring and in previous years. And those are when we learn of changes to a project's cost, scope, or readiness, and also when those changes lead us to consider fill-in projects in earlier years of the so at a very high level, the committee responded favorably to 3 process improvements that staff are actively developing and continue to develop. Those were quarterly project readiness updates, pre-readiness days workshops, and a more formal, I guess, or explicit solicitation for transit fill-in projects. So you can expect to receive more information about those 3 proposals soon as staff continues to kind of work out the details. But just wanted to give everyone here a heads up. These are conversations that are ongoing. The other item that we touched on was the possibility of proactively rescoring projects in order so that we can meet difficult, time-sensitive decisions with fairness and consistency. The committee's if I can say, kind of informal consensus, at least my read of the committee's thoughts on this was that we want some further opportunities to explore and discuss this possibility. We didn't make any decisions around this, but we think it's worth looking into this possibility a bit further. So that's the report out from the previous meeting. Also, please do save the date for the next one. We've penciled it in for Thursday, October 17th at 1 p.m. We're working on the agenda, and we expect to have some more information to share about that at the upcoming MPO board meeting. Very much.
Thank you, Jen. I forgot to ask, does anybody have any questions for either Tom or Jen? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Chair. Not much of a report since the executive director pretty much told you the contents of our last meeting. So I could say more, but I like to say to anyone who wants to talk with me about restructuring, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I was pleased to see how generally supportive my colleagues on the advisory council were about it. I mean, I'm generally supportive too, but there are always questions, and devils and the devil/the genius is in the details. But I'm happy to talk with anyone if you just want to know more about how I'm thinking and feeling, or if you want to convey things to me, either through me to the staff or just have a chat about it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the MPO minutes of July 18th. Can I get a motion and a second to approve these minutes? And please state your name for the record when making the motion. Eric Barassa. Eric, you having trouble unmuting? Tom Bent.
There we go.
All right.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
I will start by calling David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa. Okay, I will acknowledge Hannah Swilakowski.
Yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran.
Matt Moran, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozes.
David Kozes, yes.
John Alessi.
John Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Shoot, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Kristen Guichard.
Kristen Guichard, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Chris Diorio.
Chris Diorio, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Do we have anyone else who has joined since who would like to be recognized for the role? With that, the motion carries, and back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the Boston Region MPO MOU update. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Dave Hong, Manager of MPO Activities and Staff to the MPO. I'm here to present the latest Memorandum of Understanding update and to ask the board to vote to approve the revised document. For background, the MOU Update Committee has now completed its assigned mandate with work spanning from January of this year to this month, making updates that were originally promised and also incorporating board and public comments along the way, culminating in the revised MOU that we have today, which is also posted. As we move to the next slide, the public comment period ran from August the 16th and concluded on September the 6th. During that time, we received one public comment through the Government Affairs Officer at the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, which has since been reviewed and incorporated into the MOU revision. What is shown and highlighted on this slide is a process that occurs already, but it's good to be documented. And so thank you, MWRTA, for the valuable suggestion. I will pause on the slide just for you to be able to read through before advancing. As we move to the next slide then, with the conclusion of the public comment period, staff will now begin collecting member signatures over the next 3 weeks or so. A couple of reminders here, important notes for board members here. If you could please keep an eye out in your inboxes for a DocuSign email and sign where you have the delegated authority. Alternatively, please give anyone within your organization whose review is critical to signing a heads up today or within the next few days. Echoing Committee Chair Tom Benn's message from earlier, this includes legal review where required or review by the official MPO representative to whom you are a delegate or a designee. Equally important, the DocuSign email itself will have a set of instructions about how to sign for yourself or on behalf of another. Please read that carefully and thank you. The latest deadline for signatures is by October the 24th MPO meeting, which is 2 from today's. If you anticipate that you will need more time, please let me know directly through email this week or next week so that we can make arrangements. And thank you for that as well. As we move to the next and final slide of this presentation, MPO staff then request that the board votes to approve the revised Memorandum of Understanding or the revised Memorandum of Understanding. I am happy to answer questions and turn back to the chair.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to approve this MOU as presented today? Tom Benn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion that the board votes to approve the revised Memorandum of Understanding.
Jen Rowe.
Delighted to second that motion.
Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
David Moeller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Anna Swidlikowski.
Anna Swidlikowski, yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran.
Matt Moran, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozes.
David Kozes, yes.
John Alessi.
Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Benn, yes.
Kristen Guichard.
Kristen Guichard, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Christy Ario.
Christy Ario, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Is there anyone I have not called for the roll? That motion carries, and back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I'd like to take a moment to thank Tom and the team and the committee, as well as Dave and the staff for all their hard work on this. It was really important and really well done. Thank you very much. Tegan, you have something you'd like to say?
Just very similar, David. You stole my thunder. I also wanted to just thank Tom and the committee members. It's important work. It takes a long time, and it is a very important core aspect of governance of this body. And I just really appreciate your work. So thank you from staff as well.
And Tom, would you like to say anything?
Yes. First, thank you for the thank yous. But I wanted to thank you for all the board members of not only this committee, but the previous one, which was the ad hoc committee. And David, Tegan, and all the staff, they did just a phenomenal job guiding us through, which was somewhat complicated issues here. And but they made it really a good process, and I really wanted to thank them all for that. So thank you again for the thank yous.
Thank you, Tom. Next item on the agenda is an action item on the CMAQ mid-performance period progress report. Sam Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Taylor, and I am the Manager of Performance-Based Planning and Programming. And today I will be presenting to you an update on the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ, as I will refer to it moving forward today, mid-performance period progress report, which is a report submitted at the midpoint of 4-year reporting periods in accordance with FHWA regulations. Next slide, please. So we will begin with a refresher on the CMAQ performance area. We will provide a short briefing on the mid-performance period progress report that the MPO is submitting to the state before October 1st. We will provide an update on CMAQ performance, and that is on the 3 federally required performance measures that were adopted back in October of 2022. We will conclude with a request of the board, which is to vote to adjust the 4-year performance targets for one of the 3 measures. And that one is non-single occupancy vehicle travel to work. So next slide, please. So this graphic may look familiar to members of the board who have attended presentations on performance target setting in the past. CMAQ is one of the 6 federal performance areas on which MPOs are required to establish performance targets. CMAQ targets are set for FHWA-defined 4-year periods. Right now, we are a little bit past the midpoint of the 4-year period of 2022 to 2025. Next slide, please. As part of CMAQ program and CMAQ requirements, state DOTs and MPOs report on traffic congestion and on-road mobile source emissions as they are related to transportation in the region. Jurisdictions submit CMAQ performance plans every 4 years, which include 2-year and 4-year performance targets on 3 measures. Again, that current 4-year period is 2022 to 2025. And by October 1st, the MPO will be submitting a report to MassDOT, and MassDOT will include that report as an attachment to its biennial performance report. And while not all MPOs submit a mid-period progress report, the impetus for the Boston region submitting a mid-performance period report is because of a now defunct designation for air quality, and more specifically, carbon monoxide emissions that span from 2002 to 2022. That designation, after a 20-year maintenance period, expired in 2022, but that was right after the start of the current performance period, hence why we are submitting this report. Next slide, please. So the report that I mentioned in the last slide has 2 main components. First, the report provides updates on the 3 performance measures and their related targets. And secondly, the report contains a complete list of CMAQ program-funded transportation projects that were programmed between 2022 and 2025, and their relationship to the 3 CMAQ performance measures. So these projects typically fall into the following TIP programs: bicycle and pedestrian, community connections, complete streets, intersection improvements, and transit improvements. Next slide, please. So in 2022, the MPO is required to set targets in 3 performance areas, and those are emissions reduction of carbon monoxide, peak hour of excessive delay per capita, or PHED, and then the third one is non-single occupancy vehicle travel to work, which I would like to stress is our main focus of the 3 measures today. So performance targets and non-SOV travel are set at the urbanized area level, or UZA level, and at this mid-performance report time, MPOs are allowed to adjust their targets. So the report also shows progress on CMAQ projects programmed between 2022 and 2025. Next slide, please. This chart shows where performance measures are applicable and also their desired direction. So non-SOV travel applies to the entire Boston, Massachusetts, New Hampshire UZA. We want to see greater values in that area, since a higher percentage of non-SOV travel is desirable. For PHED, that is also set at the UZA level, and for that one, we would like to see lower values, since fewer hours of total delays in congestion are desirable. And for the emissions reduction measure, that applies to any programming in Waltham, which I will cover in the next slide. But that applies to any programming in Waltham, since this is the localized area that was found to be in non-attainment for carbon monoxide emissions way back in 2002. For this measure, we want to see higher values, since more reductions of emissions are desirable. However, I do want to note that while we're reporting back on all 3 performance measures, again, the focus today is on the measure of non-SOV travel, since that's the one in which we're recommending that the board vote on a target adjustment. Next slide, please. So I'll go slightly more in depth on each performance measure. The first one is emissions reduction of carbon monoxide. So back in the 90s, the EPA found that emissions of carbon monoxide in Waltham were too high, or in something called non-attainment. So over a period of 20 years, 2002 to 2022, MassDOT and the MPO completed steps of a required maintenance plan. And part of that plan was to establish programming for and set targets on projects that would help reduce carbon monoxide emissions from transportation in Waltham. So most recently in 2022, the MPO set a target of reducing carbon monoxide emissions by 0.354 kilograms per day. And that 0.354 kilograms per day value is based on the NUMO microtransit service expansion project, which counted towards this target since it would reduce emissions in and around Waltham. Next slide, please. So the aforementioned NUMO project is something that was not necessarily funded as a corrective action for carbon monoxide emissions. NUMO was funded as a TIP project on its own overall merit, as a community connections project, but because the project took CMAQ funds and technically overlaps with Waltham and has connections in Waltham, the organization was required to count it towards this performance measure and set a target based on ridership levels. So this chart shows the 2-year and 4-year targets set in 2022, as well as an update for actual performance. And during the 2 years that the NUMO project operated, reductions of carbon monoxide were found to be 0.053 kilograms per day, which of course is less than the 0.354 kilograms per day. I do want to note that because this 20-year maintenance period has now expired and been expired for a couple of years, and carbon monoxide levels have been back in compliance for over 20 years, there are no consequences for underperformance. We are simply reporting back on this performance measure, and we will not be doing so at the end of the full 4-year performance period. Next slide, please. So this brings us to our second measure, peak hour of excessive delay per capita, which is PHED. PHED is a measure of congestion during peak AM and PM travel times. This is a region-wide measure of total hours of congestion on the national highway system on roads in the urbanized area, and that is divided per capita by population. I know that was a lot there. The most recent estimate of actual performance shows that PHED decreased from 18 hours per capita to 14.8 between 2021 and 2022. However, as you'll see on the following slide, PHED has the tendency to be pretty elastic, so staff does not recommend adjusting this 4-year target. Next slide, please. I will be brief about this slide because I really want to get to the next performance area. But this chart shows performance over time for PHED. PHED bottomed out at about 12.8 in 2022, meaning there was significantly less rush hour traffic in prior years, likely due to the pandemic. This measure increased to 18 hours per capita in 2021, but then fell again to 14.8 in 2022. So while the most recent estimate for actual performance is below the targets, and that is better than the targets, it would be very difficult to make assumptions about meaningful assumptions about rush hour traffic congestion over the next few years. So we are not recommending any adjustments here. Next slide, please. And finally, the third measure, non-SOV travel to work. This measure helps capture how well the region is doing at limiting congestion and emissions produced by commutes to work. This particular measure requires no calculating on the MPO's part. It's actually taken directly from the American Community Survey as part of the US Census. So while there are several modes of transportation that participants can select from in the survey, I should note that as part of this, work from home is a mode of transport. And I will also note that while not all commuters enjoy a single mode of transport to work, all the modes add up to 100%. So respondents to the ACS survey must choose only one mode. And the question on the survey actually reads, how did this person usually get to work last week? Next slide, please. So this chart shows performance over time on non-SOV travel to work, as well as some future projections on the metric. So back in 2022, using data that was available up to 2016 to 2020, which was the most recent 5-year ACS estimate at the time, the MPO set a 2-year target of 38.8% and a 4-year target of 39.8% non-SOV travel. So given the most recent estimates for 5-year and 1-year estimates that are provided by the ACS, MPO staff was able to make some projections, which are in the gray box, of how the UZA will fare on non-SOB travel for the subsequent reporting periods of 2019 to 2023, 2024 to 2020 to 2024, and 2021 to 2025. So it is very likely that the measure for non-SOB travel will fall between 42.2% and 43.3% at the time increment of the 4-year target, or 2021 to 2025. Yes, you are not mistaken that you see a peak of non-SOV travel for the period of 2020 to 2024. Non-SOV travel peaked in 2020 and then slightly receded in 2021 and 2022 as we saw post-pandemic travel patterns return to I guess the pre-pandemic normal somewhat. But because this is a rolling 5-year average, actual performance continued to increase as pre-pandemic years were cut out of the performance period. So MPO staff has made estimates that include an annual leveling off or like a flattening decrease in non-SOV levels in 2023, 2024, and 2025, which is closer to what we have experienced since 2020. So even though performance is likely to be on the downswing in 2025, this net performance increase is still quite significant and a few percentage points above the targets that were set a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. And so given the summaries provided, MPO staff requests that the board vote to adjust the 4-year non-SOV performance target up from 39.8% to 42.6% for the period of 2021 to 2025. This figure of 42.6 is the middle projection made by MPO staff. Spikes in work from home in 2020, as well as lingering effects in 2021 and 2022, increased the rolling 5-year average so much that it's pretty difficult to imagine not reaching this 4-year target. So yes, I will take any questions that anybody has after this, but I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sam. Questions for Sam? Eric Barassa.
Sam, what do you think we attribute this increase? Is it the increase in working from home predominantly?
Predominantly, yes. The report that we will submit in the next couple of weeks stresses that, but yes, it is predominantly the increase in work from home over the last few years that allows us to exceed this target.
Thanks.
Lynn Diggins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So following up on Eric's question, so you said that we don't calculate those non-SOV percentages, right? They come from, I would just love to see the numerator and the denominators being on those values, just to get a sense of how those two values are changing. Is it possible for me to get that if I look for it?
Talking about projections or the past data that's available.
The past data, because I just want to get a sense of like what's so maybe, and then maybe you could just point me to where I look for. I'm happy to do the work myself to find like the numbers that I use to calculate those percentages, but I really want to see especially how that denominator is changing, because you said, when we talk about the PHED, that you called it elastic, but did you really mean elastic or did you mean volatile?
It's definitely a number that swings a lot from year to year, depending on and because that measure is only measured on roads that are on the national highway system. It could be a matter of there being work done on a certain interstate or a certain change done to one interstate that can actually skew the data significantly. So.
Yeah. Okay, all right, because elasticity kind of implies like a kind of demand or some kind of a cost that's affecting, and normally that would hint at volatility also hints at causality, but the causality behind volatility is often harder to tease out, than with elasticity, because with elasticity you can usually say, okay, well, we changed this variable by X% and we expect to meet X or Y% of effect, So I'm interested in the fact that you expect the PHED to return to 22. It's around 14 now. Granted, it's volatile, but that's like a 50% increase. And I find that it's challenging to accept that that is going to return to that, and we're not going to see some kind of effect on non-SOV, which makes me think that we might be a little aggressive, or optimistic. If the PHED is going to return, to 22, that we're going to be able to meet those goals. I'm all for the stretch goals, but I'm just explaining, my concerns, and maybe can tease out the question in that. No, okay, I didn't phrase the question. I didn't explain it well enough to understand the question. So let me say the question then. So can you see how we can increase the PHED, without decreasing the non-SOV?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, Len.
Yeah.
One reason I do want to stress is that it was very hard for us to make any real projections on PHED, and part of the reason for that is because it's actually a data management issue from a couple of years ago. We were not able to recover most of the documentation on how we actually calculated these measures a couple of years ago. I believe that those were made in coordination with MassDOT. But we were actually not able to recover those, and so we had to kind of like make the calculations from scratch. So even though there is a certain formula that we follow each time, there is a little bit of there are some choices you can make within that formula each time. So we weren't confident that how we made the calculations this time in 2024 was the exact same way that was done in 2022. It's very similar, but because of that, we didn't want to draw any like direct lines. So when we do this again in 2 years, I hear what you're saying. We should absolutely look at PHED performance and targets in relation to non-SOV travel, because they're very much related. But at this time, it was just it was not it would have been very difficult to make assumptions about the next couple of years and adjust that target.
Well, I very much appreciate this for straightforwardness on this. So, straightforwardness of your response. So, thanks. And just a last thing, quick comment. On page the first sentence in section 1.3, there's just an inherent confusion in that sentence. It essentially equates to negative A equals A, because it says non-SOV travel to work is a measure of the percentage of workers who commute to work using an SOV. And you know what? When I read it again, I'm beginning to think that maybe there's confusion simply on my part, but I just point that out. And so that's it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, can we get a motion to approve the change in non-SOV travel to work targets from 39.8 to 42.6, and to affirm all the other targets presented today? Eric Barassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric Barassa. I will make that motion as presented today.
Lynn Diggins.
Happy to second it, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
Absolutely. David Muller.
Yes.
John Bouchard.
John Bouchard, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Thank you. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Anna Swidlikowski.
Anna Swidlikowski, yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Matt Moran.
Matt Moran, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
David Kozis.
David Kozis, yes.
John Alessi.
Alessi, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Aaron Shute, yes.
Tom Bent.
Sorry, Tom Bent, yes.
Kristen Guichard.
Kristen Guichard, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Darlene Nguyen.
Darlene Wynn, yes.
Chris Diorio,
Chris Diorio, yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Have I missed anyone? If not, with that, the motion carries. Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the quarterly engagement update. Aaron McGuire and Stella Jordan. I'm not sure which one of you is going first, but take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everyone. My name is Stella Jordan. I'm the Public Engagement Program Manager at the Boston Region MPO. Aaron and I are really excited to bring you a public engagement data update this morning. And if we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So we'll just be discussing today the goals and motivation for bringing this update to you all. I'll summarize engagement activities over the past 10 months, and we'll review themes that have emerged from public comments we've received. We're also going to share some discussion questions for staff on the board to consider as we continue to progress through the long-range planning process and addressing regional needs. If we could go on to the next slide. We've prepared an interactive story map that includes more detailed information and data. That's available in today's meeting agenda, and I believe Aaron also just dropped a link in the chat. We're going to highlight the key elements of our data and analysis during today's presentation, but we also encourage you to check out that story map on your own, and definitely let us know if you have any questions or feedback on the content of that story map as well. Next slide, please. So this is a new initiative, which is intended to help highlight key themes that have emerged from engagement events and activities on an ongoing basis, and to help connect this data more closely to our planning work, particularly to the long-range plan. So all data, as a background, all data collected through public engagement during the 4-year LRTP development cycle is fed into the LRTP to inform visioning discussions, investment program designs, and of course the needs assessment. As such, we are planning to provide quarterly summaries of the engagement activities we conduct and the data we collect through those activities, really to help us understand the evolving public needs and priorities that we're hearing, and better inform our discussions of the development of the next LRTP. So intended outcomes for this effort are better alignment between public priorities and planning outcomes, strengthened relationships with community-based organizations and advocacy groups, and increased transparency in decision-making overall. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of background on where this is all coming from, over the past few years, I've presented an annual memo documenting engagement program activities through the lens of evaluating our effectiveness and identifying gaps in our engagement. This update we're bringing you today is sort of a supplement to that analysis. We will still be sharing more regular updates in the future about our engagement and who we're reaching through our engagement and how we're addressing gaps. But the primary focus of this presentation today is really on what we're hearing from the people that we've been engaging. Over the past few years, as our engagement practice has developed, we've worked on implementing more holistic approaches that are focused on building long-term relationships with stakeholders, rather than conducting engagement activities that are focused around a specific project. And the development of the next LRTP actually offers us a great opportunity to continue evolving this strategy and engaging folks on their needs, concerns, and ideas more broadly, rather than just through the lens of the LRTP specifically as a standalone project. We also learned some lessons from our engagement for Destination 2050, particularly in terms of how we can build transparency in our decision-making and how we can really emphasize and clarify the connections between engagement input and planning outcomes, which is something that we heard a really strong need for from advocates that we've been engaging and developing relationships with over the past few years. So I will hand it over to Aaron now to talk a bit more as well about how we're thinking about the next LRTP and how these updates will fit in.
Thank you, Stella, and good morning, everyone. My name is Erin McGuire. I am a transportation planner with the Boston MPO, and most notably, I'm leading our efforts to update our next long-range transportation plan. Our current LRTP, Destination 2050, was endorsed in the summer of 2023, And then since then, staff have been working to gather foundational information for our subsequent update, which has included gathering feedback and assessing that feedback from our previous development cycle, and beginning to gather information from the general public about transportation needs and priorities. As Stella mentioned, we've received feedback that encouraged us to build more substantial links between the engagement feedback we receive and our planning outcomes. Through the development of our next LRTP, we will be bringing forward recurring themes similar to what you're going to hear today to provide a foundation for future discussions that we'll have on regional priorities and goals. Following the synopsis of these themes, we're going to review a brief set of discussion questions that have emerged from our review of these comments. And as we prepare for future discussions about visioning for the region, we are going to bring these discussion questions back as a continuous thread to guide our conversations. Back to you, Stella.
Thanks. We go on to the next slide, please. So just to summarize what we're actually talking about in the context of this presentation, this particular update covers engagement beginning in FFY 2024. So that began on October 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2024. Going forward, we plan to provide more regular updates throughout the year, but during the 10 months that this update includes, staff participated in 20 in-person public events, including farmers markets, open streets events, and events hosted by community organizations. Staff also attended or held 23 virtual meetings, including meetings with the advocacy and community-based organizations and regional transportation advisory council meetings, as well as 17 sub-regional meetings with municipalities. These engagement activities allowed us to hear from a really broad range of stakeholders, including members of the public, municipalities, and advocates. And through the public engagement program, staff prioritize engaging stakeholders and communities who are currently underrepresented in the transportation planning process and have been disproportionately impacted by planning decisions and face ongoing barriers to participation. So we use data about the transportation equity populations in our region to really intentionally target our engagement efforts to these communities, including attending events in specific areas, making decisions about what to prioritize, and building relationships and partnerships with organizations that represent or serve equity communities. And by continuously tracking and analyzing engagement data, we're also able to identify gaps in our engagement and adapt our strategies to address them. In the story map, you'll see the geographic distribution of events we attended, as well as the topics emphasized during engagement in relation to the distribution of equity populations in the region. Next slide, please. But being that today we're really focused on the content of what we're hearing, we track all of the comments and feedback that we receive by topic area. And we see a really broad variety of topics that emerged during the period covered by this update. This is a combination of comments on specific projects that the MPO is conducting engagement for, as well as general or unprompted feedback that we're just collecting at events and meetings. And for the purposes of this analysis and to support LRTP discussions in particular, we've organized the feedback we received into 4 key themes, which if we can go on to the next slide, those are, just advance one. Those are safety, including bicycle and pedestrian safety, public transit improvements, municipal and interagency collaboration and partnerships, and policy explorations. Are we able to move on to the next slide? Oh, sorry. Okay, one back. That's that. Didn't quite make it in. We had a slide to illustrate this shift, but I'll just talk through it. So I highlighted 4 themes here. You see more than that on this chart. Essentially, although we received a substantial percentage of overall comments about the TIP, we're excluding comments on specific TIP projects from this analysis, as those have been or are being addressed in other forums already. And we've incorporated comments related to TIP policy into the policy category. So I will hand it off to Erin to discuss our analysis of the feedback in each of these 4 key theme areas in more detail now.
Next slide, please. So the first major theme that we're going to be discussing today is safety. There was a large number of these comments that would also discuss the safety of vulnerable roadway users, such as pedestrians and bicyclists. These comments ranged from identifying specific connection points of interest in the bicycle network that members would want to see prioritized, to discussions of bike lane design elements. For example, we just received many comments expressing support for physical infrastructure barriers, such as bollards in these bike lanes. There were also a significant number of comments that would discuss safety needs at specific locations. So we have prepared a map for you all that is on this slide and also visible in the story map to view those specific locations. In the story map, if you select each diamond, a pop-up will appear that will allow you to view the comment in full. And then a notable ongoing effort that staff are engaging with related to safety is the development of our Regional Vision Zero Action Plan, which is funded by the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant. Information that we gather here related to safety is being used to help inform engagement strategies for future Vision Zero outreach. And into the future, we are likely to continue to hear many comments regarding safety. Next slide, please. Next, we heard many comments that would discuss the importance of high-quality transit service to the region. In total, this amounted to about 20% of all of the comments we received. Some of the comments that we received noted challenges with accessibility in and around stations, also including on-service vehicles themselves. Commenters would discuss the desire to improve travel times and reliability, specifically noting the importance of that for travelers that rely on bus services. And finally, improving connectivity to destinations throughout the region to help promote active mobility. Next slide, please. Another theme that we heard a lot about was the coordination that occurs throughout the industry. Many of these comments came from our municipal outreach efforts and our subregional meetings, and they touched on topics including the limited capacity of smaller municipalities, which makes it a bit difficult to prioritize transportation planning efforts. There is an interest in better understanding available grants and funding opportunities, particularly in light of the additional discretionary grants available through the BIL. There were discussions of limitations to Chapter 90 funding. We heard many comments of support for the federal fiscal year 2025 project design pilot. And there were also conversations between municipalities about facility maintenance and what happens after a project is constructed. Next slide, please. And finally, we also had several instances where a commenter would encourage the MPO to specifically explore different policy mechanisms to achieve our goals. This would be done with an ultimate goal of helping to further national, statewide, and local performance measures and goals. Some of the policy areas that commenters encouraged us to further investigate included strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, strategies to address roadway and congestion pricing, the effectiveness of travel and parking demand management, and different strategies that we can pursue to achieve resilience to climate change and other extreme weather events. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so, that's a lot of information, and really this is kind of, as this represents like a change in our strategy in terms of collecting and analyzing engagement data and sharing it with you all. This will be evolving over time. So just to talk through a few next steps for public engagement, and then Erin will also discuss some next steps related to the LRTP. Specifically on engagement, we're going to continue conducting engagement activities like the ones you heard about today. And especially as we approach the new federal fiscal year, we'll also be planning more LRTP specific activities and broadly directed needs and goals activities to directly connect to the needs assessment and the vision and goal setting processes within the LRTP. Our engagement strategies will continue to be informed by ongoing data analysis to address gaps we're seeing and try to ensure that we capture as diverse and representative a sample of people and perspectives in our region as possible. And as you've been hearing about, we also have a lot of engagement projects planned in the engagement program in the coming months, from the community planning lab to updates to the advisory council. And all of this will also help us inform our engagement strategies overall, as well as the development of the next LRTP. So we look forward to continuing to build upon these periodic engagement updates, and we'll also use them to keep you informed on the evolution of the Advisory Council and other engagement efforts as well. I also just want to highlight that although we're drawing a direct connection between these engagement updates and the LRTP here, which Erin will talk more about in a moment, these data about stakeholder and public needs and priorities are also relevant to really all areas of our work. We do share them with our colleagues internally to help inform the development of other programs and projects, and we're working on more streamlined ways to do that. And we hope that you'll find them useful to informing your discussions and decisions on other aspects of our work as well. And I'll hand it back to Erin.
Thank you. Next slide. So I wanted to take just a moment to walk us through some expected plans for the next few years as we begin developing our subsequent LRTP. As you know, in 2023, we endorsed Destination 2050. This year in federal fiscal year 2024, we have really been focused on looking back at feedback that we received from that development cycle, as well as beginning to gather foundational information for our next development. Next year, federal fiscal year 2025 is going to include staff preparing an update to our needs assessment. We're going to be discussing potential futures to test through scenario planning, as well as doing some very early document development. After that, that leads us to federal fiscal year 2026, where we will really in earnest begin to discuss the vision, goals, and objectives for the region. We'll dive into deep discussions about projects to list in the LRTP, as well as discussing any modifications to investment programs. And that leads us into federal fiscal year 2027, where the plan will be finalized and endorsed. And then we will get to do this all over again. And with that, we could go to the next slide. As we had mentioned earlier, one goal of this is to provide an ongoing forum to have some discussions about what we are hearing in these engagement activities. As we were reviewing these comments, a couple of discussion questions came to mind that we wanted to bring about today, and we'll be bringing about as we have these discussions in the future about our regional goals and vision. So I'm going to read them out. I would be more than happy to hear any feedback you have at this moment, or also would love to partake in conversations offline. So those questions include, how can community input be effectively incorporated into planning processes to strengthen our community relationships? How can the MPO help to support municipalities in project initiation and development? What resources are needed to increase the region's competitiveness for discretionary grant opportunities? And what information is valuable to you all when considering regional priorities? And with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Stella. Comments, questions, discussion from the members? Lynn Diggins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, just to answer the second question, I think anything you can do to form relationships with the employees, in municipalities that are responsible for transportation, it would go a long way. And sometimes those employees will know about groups, in town, in their municipalities who have a focus on transportation. And sometimes those groups have more or less diversity, but they certainly have opinions. So there's that. But I have one question, and I'm looking at the distribution of in-person meetings. I see a cluster in the inner core, and I was wondering why there aren't more in-person in other parts of the region. It's a little ironic coming from me who loves the virtual realm, but I was just curious as to why that's the case. Thank you. That's it. Thanks.
Stella?
Thanks, Len. Yeah, I can take that one. So part of this is going back 10 months. It's kind of a staff resource issue. We're looking at activities that we could get to easily with the time and resources that we had available. And there happened to be a lot of activities in the inner core over the summer, not to say that there aren't outside of the inner core. But I will also say that as we have been mapping and tracking and analyzing all of this data, this is one of the sort of, I will say, gaps that we identified, is that as you pointed out, a lot of our in-person engagement is concentrated within a more specific area. So one of the things that we're doing sort of to take this information and inform future engagement steps is to really do a more focused prioritization of where we can go outside of the inner core, where our impact can be maximized in terms of the people and communities that we can reach, particularly like where there are equity communities outside of the inner core, and what events are happening there that we can get to. So that is an area that we're looking to expand upon, and you know, thank you for pointing it out as well. One of the many things that we have planned to sort of continue to improve and learn from all of this.
Thank you. Sandy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mainly wanted to congratulate staff on this presentation. I thought this was a great way to put it. Looking forward to seeing what you're building out in the future, and clearly being very thorough and proactive with your efforts. You know, I'd love if you have transit-related comments for you to share them with the MBTA. I am happy to be a conduit for that. And, you know, as you're thinking about what's going to go in the long-range plan, you know, we're going to be developing with MassDOT the next program for mass transportation, the MBTA's strategic capital program. So we'd really like to kind of share that development process, and any feedback that you receive, I think can really help shape what OTP and we are working on with that. So looking forward to more coordination there. Thanks.
Thanks, Sandy. Chris DiOrio?
Hi, I just want to ask, how do you guys like advertise and get the word out to the public that you're looking for input, or will be at certain events, and kind of encourage them to come give you the data you're looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of the events that we've been prioritizing attending over the past several months have been events put on by other organizations or municipalities. We have found over time that that's a more effective way for us to reach more people than us trying to hold our own events and invite people to them. Not that we don't do any of that, but in general, in terms of volume, we've found it's been really successful going to like open streets events, for example, that the city of Boston puts on and does a ton of advertising for. So we know that there's already going to be a lot of people coming to those, or community fairs or farmers markets. We post, when we attend these events, we post them on our meeting calendar on our website. We, I think, could probably be a bit more intentional about communicating to broader communities that will be there, though. So that's a good point.
Yeah, I think it would be good to let the municipalities know that, you know, you'll be in that area, and then the municipalities can then maybe get the word out a little further on their websites, or things like that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jen Rowe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd also like to commend staff on getting out there, on like kind of sharing with us, you know, what you're doing, and being very transparent about, you know, where you've received input, where you haven't. I think it does help us. We can identify the gaps until we, you know, see, have information about them and see them. So I appreciate the kind of you coming out here and sharing this. And I also would, you know, encourage folks to reach out to staff. They've been really excellent to work with on those open streets events, to try to, you know, coordinate. We usually try to set up near one another to just kind of to help folks, you know, understand that there's a, you know, connection between these two different entities, your city, transportation department, in our case, and so that's been excellent. Yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Eric Barassa?
Thank you. These are really great questions, and you know, I know we're not going to go deep into them, you know, today, but if there are other forums or opportunities you're interested in getting, you know, input on these, you know, happy to help with that. I do have a question about the second bullet point. How can the MPO help to support municipalities in project initiation and development? We we initiated the pilot design process, and I'm wondering, I know that is relatively new, but over the course of the next year, will there be any like lessons learned from that could inform that question?
I think yes. My understanding, and I definitely want to leave space for my colleagues more intimately aware of the project design pilot, is that we're not taking applications this year for it. So it's going to be a year of taking lessons from how it goes and seeing if there are opportunities to either scale it up or, as you said, take lessons from it. And again, see how the MPO can support municipalities in getting a stable project pipeline going and one that we can regularly reach to for projects.
Yeah. And then on that same point, I think this is a good question. I think as we start the development of the UPWP too, what can we be doing with our planning resources to also be helping projects advance and be teed up for for the tip. And I think that even could even touch on number 3 about resources needed to increase the region's competitiveness for discretionary grant opportunities, because in addition to our formula funds, we also have a lot of these discretionary grants out there that we could be strategic about going after in a coordinated fashion.
Thanks, Eric. Kim Miller.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I think it's great. Thank you, David. I think it's great that you folks are reaching out to people where they are. I always think it's a great strategy to go where people are rather than ask people to come to where you are. So I think that's a great strategy. And moving forward, I would just encourage you to reach out to all users of the transportation system. So I'm just gonna list a bunch of what I think are users of the transportation system and ask you if you've what your approach is going to be to reaching out to some of these people. So, for example, have you reached out, or what have been your efforts reaching out to the disability community, emergency responders, the freight community, including not truckers, small package deliverers, those kind of things, the business community, chambers of commerce, et cetera, and also transit users and transit providers, and then also tradespeople who are huge users. Sometimes they have no choice but to drive, and I was just wondering if you had any thought about how you would outreach to tradespeople and other users of the highway system, whether it's AAA or Mass Motor Transport or American Trucking Association, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. That's a really good point. We've certainly done some pretty, I would say, broad-scaled efforts to reach out to a few of the types of users that you mentioned, particularly like transit users and the disability community. I would say on the other ones, those are certainly gaps in our engagement, in the data that we're collecting, the people that we're hearing from. I think some of the other sort of projects or programs that are going on that we mentioned today, things like the Community Planning Lab, which will be a really small scale pilot, but just to sort of try to test out strategies to bring more people into the MPO's process and figure out what works and best in terms of providing them the education and knowledge and tools to engage from where they are, as well as the restructuring of the advisory council to really try to intentionally bring in a more robust and diverse membership, will be really key opportunities to support engaging some of those communities and stakeholder types that you listed. And in the meantime, I think, point well taken, we can be a bit more intentional about how we kind of segment out the different types of populations that we're looking at. Typically, we focus on for equity analyses, but I think there's, as you pointed out, a broader swath of roadway users and transit users and folks who are interacting with the transportation system that we can think about trying to reach in different ways. So I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, if I may, thank you. That's great. And because I live in Framingham, and boy, would I hear people complaining about congestion in traffic. That's what I hear, and I was just a little bit surprised that was not even in your top 5 list. Maybe that was in other, but that's what I hear living out in, I guess, in the suburbs. I guess. So I would just encourage you to reach out to these other communities. And you raise a good point about RTEC and trying to bring them into the advisory process too. So that's great too. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I will say too, I think the congestion comments I think may have gotten lumped into the broader like policy category, but we are also working with our colleagues who work in like the policy congestion and freight areas to sort of figure out what they need in terms of data and who they're wanting to reach and hear from as well. So trying to better coordinate kind of from multiple fronts there too.
Thank you.
Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to pick up on Ken's comment about different groups, including I would suggest reaching out to the Greater Boston Labor Council. That is basically looks at all the different unions and construction unions, and you can talk with the individual union, like IBEW, the Electrical Union 103, because I know just the people that are working for me are coming in from the South Shore a lot and the North Shore. So, and all I hear about is congestion and traffic. So, and what a lot of it is, what we're hearing is it's the last mile that's the worst. So I found that's even here in Somerville. Once people finally get here, it's the last mile getting from A to B. And I've been hearing that comment a lot more. The other thing, I think this whole presentation is right on. When you're engaging all these groups, are you going over past engagements, issues that have come up before and what you've done about them? Because one of the things I hear, and it could be, community meetings or whatever, is saying, I'll hear a lot from, residents and things saying, well, we brought this up at a year ago and what happened, and, we never get any follow up. So why should I keep doing this if nobody's listening to me? So I think that's an important piece too. And you're probably doing that, but it just came to mind. We're going through what they call WAD meetings now, and that's what they're hearing. Oh, we were at this meeting last year. We raised these 10 concerns. What are you doing about them? Never mind what's new concerns. So I just find it's a way to keep people engaged. Their voices are being heard and something's actually happening with it. But great job on this. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really excellent point. We do try to do that. I think kind of part of the goal of like not just bringing this presentation to you, but really trying to analyze and share the data that we're collecting in this way is so that we can better illustrate changes over time. And that's not just for us and for you, but also for our own transparency's sake. And so hopefully, as we continue this process, we'll be able to have more robust data sets that we can use to help us do just that. When we go talk to communities, we can look back easily and see what we heard from them in the past. So yeah, I definitely agree that that's a really important element of it.
Any other questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, thank you very much for the update. It was very well done. Next item on the agenda is the summary of board input on the annual meeting. Taking Tyke.
Thank you, David. So hi, everyone, again. We have a short agenda item today, probably just about 15 minutes to kind of have a chance to talk together about topics for the upcoming annual meeting, which I mentioned earlier. Again, the date is November 14th. We are hoping to get a draft agenda to you relatively soon so that you all as board members can use that to discuss internally and determine attendance. And over the last several weeks, we've asked if you could share your ideas on the agenda topics through an online survey so that we can be sure as we're developing that draft agenda that we're taking into account which you all feel would be most useful. So my goal today is just to share with you the ideas we've collected so far through that survey. We've heard a couple of other pieces of input through other forums, but at least we'll mention what was in the survey. So, and then discuss with you to see if you have anything to add in this forum, whether you already took the survey or not. So this is like last year, we had a conversation like this. We didn't do the survey, but we had a conversation because we do appreciate hearing your ideas. And then of course, we'll go back and work with the chair and the vice chair and staff to develop from that a realistic agenda from those ideas that we hear. We do already have far more ideas, as I'll show in a second, than we can accommodate. And we also have some staff-driven agenda topics that we've already brought to the table to put into the agenda. And that includes some things like the presentation on the impacts of projects that this board invests in and a Vision Zero update, which is also one of the ideas we got through the survey. So with that context, let's just touch on what we heard. It'll only take me a couple of minutes to go over it. We had essentially 6 respondents because we didn't double count if more than one person responded from the same organization or entity. So we'll say 6 individual entities responded to the survey. So next slide, please. So for easy discussion, we grouped the responses into some topic areas. We heard ideas about transportation funding, fiscal challenges of the MBTA, project delivery, especially in terms of the cost readiness and delay issues, conversations that we've been having, innovative technology, the long-range plan, which you just heard a little bit about, and Vision Zero, as I already mentioned, and then housing or land use and transportation connections. So I'll run through them quickly, but they're organized more or less in terms of frequency, just being that the top row were certainly mentioned by more than one respondent in the survey. And the bottom row, the bottom 4 really had sort of one unique maybe statement about the topic area. So next slide, please. So first, in terms of transportation funding, we heard a number of different items relating to this topic. We heard a request for an update, perhaps from the Mass Municipal Association on Chapter 90 needs and availability. We heard requests for an update on the Governor's Transportation Task Force and how the MPO can support the work. And then also update on recent polls around funding transportation in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. We also saw a few requests to consider discussing the MBTA fiscal context. There was some expressed interest in talking more about the MBTA's fiscal cliff, which has been discussed recently in some other forums like the MBTA board meetings and otherwise. Understanding the size of the gap in funding, where it came from, the timeline to act, and consequences of inaction. Next slide, please. We also heard some interest in the area of continuing to discuss project delivery, and specifically a request for considering whether highway division leadership could provide some a presentation, some discussion on project readiness and how the highway division is sort of working through those issues, followed by a discussion on how we can all work together, including, DOT, MPO staff, municipalities, and consultants, but really collaborate to make sure that we're doing the best that we can collectively to ensure that projects are advertised in the year that they're programmed. We also heard, next slide, please, to talk about innovations in mobility and specifically technology like AI and autonomous shuttles. Next slide. There's a request for a presentation on the development of the next LRTP, including discussion of major projects in the region that are anticipated. You heard an update already just in this prior item about sort of where we are in terms of engagement there. So we may not be at quite a place for that, but just again, I want to acknowledge the ideas that were shared with us. Next slide. We also had requests for a presentation by MPO staff on the Vision Zero and the regional plan and the newly announced grant for the demonstration projects. I think that's a very high likelihood that staff will be ready to talk about that at the annual meeting. And then lastly, ideas, thank you, didn't say next slide. Ideas around conversations with the connections between transportation, housing, economic development, and kind of competitiveness in the region, but really focusing on this link between transportation and these housing and sort of land use issues. And I think there's a next slide for discussion. Yeah, there you go. So happy to discuss and then take any of these ideas we hear back with us and then further kind of figure out whether they work in an agenda fit in, and what we can do to make sure that we have an annual meeting that's really engaging in the way that last year's was. It's a very different kind of meeting. And so, yeah, looking forward to discussing. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Any comments, discussion from any members? Lynn Diggins.
After a pause, I'm gonna jump in. I didn't contribute any ideas. When I saw the surveys a couple of times, I just didn't have any ideas. I like the ones that I've seen. I would suggest that we focus on the ones though that are related more to our mission as an MPO, and so that we're spending federal dollars. Even though I'm very much interested in state funding and MBTA, I don't think we really can affect that funding. As an MPO, we deal what we have on those. So I would be more inclined towards the presentations about project delivery, because we do have challenges with that, and that's why one of the reasons we have the tipper. So it'd be good for, I think, people to be more aware of what we deal with on the tipper and the issues that the MPO faces when it comes to project delivery. Because as you know, as the delays, as we encounter problems, it often has a domino effect on how we design subsequent tips. So that would be my first one. Of course, housing and transportation. Who could say no to that? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Hannah Switolkowski.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say I think that this is really great in terms of everything that you presented. It really covers a little bit of everything. Again, this will be my first time attending and really being region-wide meeting. But I do think that it is important to cover almost all of these topics just because of, what you read in the news, what you see in the media, but also the understanding of what the MPO is and the relationship to many of these items. I will say one of the biggest things I think in all the municipalities that I've been visiting is also the connection with housing and transportation. I think that is something also just very timely with the MPO as well. But I also agree the project delivery and kind of the understanding of how the MPO functions and what we do is important for folks to understand. But I think it would be great to tie in though, like the governor's task force and just how we can be supportive or get it engaged with that. And then again, I think you have to mention the concept of fiscal cliff and transportation in context also of the MPO and where we. So thanks for all of that information, and I'm really looking forward to the meeting.
Thank you. Matt Moran.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking me. Just following up on Hannah's point, I think all of these items are important. I think we should talk about sort of the full list of items that Tegan was mentioning, but I'll just put a special plug in for the fiscal cliff conversation and sort of bring that conversation out to sort of a more regional, wider audience and talking a little bit about that, particularly as we enter this potentially dire stretch where the MBTA might be forced to restrict or cut back on services if more funding isn't identified.
Thank you, Matt. Any other questions or comments, discussion? Anybody else? Seeing none. Tegan, can people still, is the survey down or is it still up or?
I think the survey's down, but I would say please feel free to email me or David Hong with further ideas if you have them. I do appreciate that these are all really great ideas. I think we will have to narrow down on what we can cover in the annual meeting itself and what's sort of attuned to that audience, because otherwise we might be meeting for something like 4 hours perhaps. So we'll work on that a little bit and just kind of take all that input into account and hopefully come up with a really great, compelling agenda. So I just appreciate it and keep the conversation coming, please.
Thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program Year in Review. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ronak Basu. I am the manager of multimodal planning and design at the Boston Region MPO. We typically have not presented work that we do through the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program in the past. So I wanted to take this opportunity and just review some of the projects that we have worked on in the past year, and also share a little bit about the work that we do that relates to technical assistance for our municipal partners and the communities in our region. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. So first, before we jump into the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program itself, let's take a step back and think about the ways in which the MPO is available as a resource to the communities for technical assistance. So we primarily work through three different avenues. The first is the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program, which I'll get into deeper in the next slide. We also have a sister program of the CTTA program that focuses more on regional transit. So we often receive requests from municipalities, from RTAs, and we support those resources and respond to those requests through the Regional Transit Service Planning Technical Support Program. And we also attend roadway safety audits that MassDOT organizes, where we discuss best practices about responding to safety challenges or issues at specific locations within our region. In addition to these three avenues, we also work on corridor and intersection studies, but I won't get into that level of detail right now because those studies are housed within a separate program, and I'd be happy to share more about that program at a later stage. Next slide, please. So jumping into the CTTA program, or the Community Transportation Technical Assistance Program, compared to most of the other programs of the MPO, this is fairly small, with an annual budget of somewhere between $65,000 and $70,000. And as a result, we tend to work on transportation planning projects that are much smaller in scale compared to the corridor and intersection studies that we do. So each project tends to be somewhere between 4 to 6 months long, with a budget of somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000. And these projects can be quite varied. And that is something I really want to emphasize, that the MPO has the resources and capacity to help municipal partners with a wide variety of needs. So we can help collect data on traffic for different types of modes, not just cars, but also trucks, bicyclists and pedestrians. We can help analyze travel behavior from the data that we collect. We can help our partners with planning and design challenges that they're facing, which are very localized. And I'll give you a flavor of some of the projects that we've worked on as well. Next slide, please. Over the last decade, we have completed 20 CTTA projects in 21 different communities, and this map highlights the different communities where we have worked on in the last 10 years, highlighted in yellow. Next slide, please. And in the past year, federal fiscal year 2024, we worked on 4 projects in 5 communities. As you can see over here, Hamilton and Ipswich, there was a shared project over there. We had another project in Swampscott and a couple more in Sharon and Rentham. Next slide, please. And the topics or themes of these 4 projects, as you can see, can be quite varied. So we have a project in Sharon that looked at improvements to the intersection, so focusing on the design of an intersection. We had traffic calming studies in Hamilton, Ipswich, and Rentham. And we had a project with Swampscott where we were exploring safer ways to access an elementary school. Next slide, please. So these 4 studies were led by Kyle Casiglio and Shravanti Gopalan Narayanan in my team. So they worked on 2 projects each, which is quite a lift. And they were advised by senior members of our team, Seth Asante and Casey Cooper. So we're going to provide a brief overview of each of these projects. And the objective of this presentation is not so much to focus on the projects themselves, but to give you an understanding of the types of issues that we have the capacity to respond to and assist with. And also, I would really like all of you to take this back to your communities. So take this back to the planners, to the community members, so that they can reach out to the MPO directly asking for assistance, because we do have the program and we do have federal dollars to respond to these requests for assistance. Next slide, please. And I will pass it on to Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronak. So the first project that we're going to look at is the Sharon Lake Massapog intersection improvements. Next slide, please. So Sharon is a suburban municipality southwest of Boston in the TRIC subregion. The study examined the intersection of Pond Street, Quincy Street, East Street, and Massapog Avenue, which is located near the geographic center of the town at the northeastern corner of Lake Massapog. It's just south of Sharon High School and presently is controlled by a traffic circle. Next slide, please. The town approached us with concerns about the intersection. They shared that there is significant confusion on who has right-of-way between northbound drivers entering the intersection from Massapog Avenue and southbound drivers attempting to make a left onto East Street. They also shared concerns about speeding through the intersection, particularly during school release. And the intersection's proximity to the high school introduces a number of vulnerable pedestrians into the intersection all at once. Finally, there's also a hiking trailhead between Pond Street and Quincy Street that leads hikers from the northeast portion of town to Lake Massapog on the other side of the intersection. Next slide, please. We conducted a site visit with town staff and with the help of MassDOT collected data about the traffic in the intersection. We found that traffic is primarily between Pond Street and then splits almost evenly between Massapog Avenue and East Street. There's only one crosswalk at the location, which is located at the southern portion, which is the farthest point from Sharon High School and also provides no safe or legal crossing between the hiking trail and Lake Massapog. Finally, the speed data we captured found that speeding in the intersection is a serious concern. The speed limit within the intersection itself is 25 miles per hour, and all of the approaches to the intersection were found to have an 85th percentile speed well above that. Fortunately, however, we did also find that despite all the concerns at the intersection, there's only been one crash in the 5-year period we looked at, which was a single vehicle accident unrelated to the right-of-way confusion. Next slide, please. In regards to that primary concern over right-of-way confusion, we witnessed several incidences of the conflict between northbound traffic and southbound traffic attempting to turn left. Here you can see the viewpoint of northbound traffic approaching the intersection, and you can see a sign there on the right that says state law yield to rotary traffic. So the location of this sign implies that northbound traffic should yield, when in fact it's actually the southbound traffic that has already exited the traffic circle and should be yielding to northbound traffic. So we see a lot of hesitation between the two. Next slide, please. In the short term, we recommend that this sign be moved just north of East Street and a left turn yield to oncoming traffic sign be installed facing southbound traffic in order to clarify who has the right of way. We also recommend improving pedestrian facilities in the intersection, particularly a high visibility crosswalk and RFB on Pond Street in order to provide a safe and legal crossing between the lake and the trail. Next slide, please. The town also shared with us 2 proposed intersection redesigns, both of which would remove the traffic circle. As we found only one crash at the intersection, we recommend that the town implement the short-term improvements and then assess whether full reconstruction is necessary. Should the town pursue reconstruction, we recommend both designs consider improving traffic calming elements to compensate for the loss of the traffic circle, as well as include bicycle facilities as was recommended in the 2014 Lake Massapog Bicycle Network Plan. And now I'll turn it to my colleague Shravanti for our next study. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Hi, everyone. My name is Shravanti Gopalan Narayanan, and I'm the Freight Planning Program Manager. Srilekha Murthy, UPWP Program Manager, and I worked on this project, and I'll be presenting our findings today. We got a request from the towns of Hamilton and Ipswich to evaluate cut-through traffic on Goodhue Street and its adjacent intersections, where Goodhue Street meets Highland Street and Waldingfield Road. Next slide, please. The study area lies along the boundary of the towns of Ipswich and Hamilton, and the town line bisects Goodhue Street. Goodhue Street is a town-accepted local road that runs north-south with no posted speed limit signs. Highland Street is a town-accepted rural major collector road that runs north-south and carries local traffic through Hamilton from the border of Hamilton and Wenham to the border of Hamilton and Ipswich and has a speed limit of 40 miles per hour. Waldingfield Road is a town-accepted local road that runs east-west and carries traffic from Highland Street into Ipswich and has a speed limit of 25 miles per hour. All these roadways are primarily residential. Next slide, please. Resident raised concerns around Goodhue Street being used as a cut-through by vehicles traveling at high speeds to get to Route 1A, in addition to poor sight distances at the intersections. The map on this slide indicates the proximity of Goodhue Street to Route 1A. Next slide, please. There were no sidewalks or crosswalks on Goodhue Street, Highland Street, or Waldingfield Road. There is no posted speed limits on either side of Goodhue Street, and some of the outdated signages needs to be replaced within the study area. Next slide, please. We collected average weekday traffic volume, peak hour turning moment counts, and speed data for the study area. So based on the traffic volume data that we collected, Goodhue Street, there is more traffic traveling southbound. On Highland Street, there is almost equal amount of traffic traveling on both the directions. And on Waldingfield Road, there is more traffic traveling westbound. Turning moment counts indicate one pedestrian traveling east-west on Goodhue Street. From speed data collected, it is evident that there is speeding on all three roadways, especially considerable amount on Goodhue Street and Waldingfield Road. Next slide, please. I would like to highlight some of the short-term recommendations proposed, which include installing posted speed limit signs of 25 miles per hour on both the directions of Goodhue Street, replace the existing stop ahead sign on Goodhue Street, realign stop bar and stop signs closer to the intersections, relocate posted speed limit signs closer to the approaches to indicate change in speed limits, and to stripe a 3 to 4 foot wide shoulder on Waldingfield Road and Goodhue Street. It is important to note that Goodhue Street and Waldingfield Road are scenic routes, so any improvements on these roadways needs to be approved by Planning Board before implementation. Next slide, please. Some of the longer-term recommendations include redesigning the intersection of Goodhue Street and Highland Street, as shown in the figure on the left. So this redesign proposes a T intersection, thereby slowing vehicles before making turns. The figure on the right summarizes the traffic calming and intersection improvement measures at the intersection of Waldingfield Road and Goodhue Street for improved visibility and reducing cut-through traffic. I will now pass it back to Kyle for the next presentation on Swampscott.
Thank you, Shravanti. So the next project we're going to look at was in Swampscott. This is the Safer School Access Design. Next slide, please. So Swampscott is a suburban municipality in the North Shore Task Force subregion located to the northeast of Boston. The study examines several streets and intersections in the eastern portion of town, elementary school, and the congregation Sharat Hayat. Next slide, please. The town approached us about this study as they are consolidating their elementary schools into a new building at the site of Stanley School, which in fact is now in its third week of operation. A previous consultant-led traffic study found that at full capacity, the new school could generate just over 1,800 new daily trips to the school, which is very significant for neighborhood roads. In the hopes of making as many of these trips as possible non-auto trips, the town has arranged a park and walk program where parents would park at the congregation Sharat Hayam and walk their students from there to the school using one of two potential routes. One that moves directly through the primary intersection of Atlantic and Humphrey, and the other which would follow Palmer Avenue to the north of the congregation. The town's primary concern with the scheme is that the intersection of Atlantic and Humphrey and Forest, which as we'll see in a moment, is not safe for young children. Next slide, please. After a site visit and data collection, we found that the intersection has approximately 13,000 daily trips, split almost evenly between Humphrey and Atlantic. As you can see from the image here, there is no pedestrian crossing in the intersection. One must walk approximately 100 meters west to the nearest crosswalk. The alternative route along Palmer Avenue is also lacking in safe pedestrian facilities at various points. Finally, there's line of sight concerns at the primary intersection. To the right of the image, you can see a slip lane island with a tree in the middle of it. This tree ends up blocking visibility, particularly for southbound traffic on Humphrey Street trying to enter the intersection. Next slide, please. From our data collection, we also found significant speeding in the approaches to the intersection, particularly along Humphrey Street, which is the primary main road approach to the school. We found 2 crash clusters in the study area, with both potential walking routes crossing one of them. The primary intersection was found to have more crashes than any other intersection in Swampscott, and the majority of these were either rear end or angle collisions that could be attributed, at least in part, due to the poor lines of sight mentioned before. The other crash cluster is at the intersection of Palmer, Humphrey, and Orchard to the north of the study area, which is a major concern if we're encouraging young children to cross it onto Orchard Circle to reach the school. Next slide, please. So in the short term, we recommend the immediate clearing of the tree and shrubbery on that slip lane island and implementing wayfinding and pedestrian facility improvements along the preferred park and walk route, which in this case, we ended up recommending the Northern Palmer Ave route, as well as building quick build and collaborative improvements, which would support existing town work in advance of the school's recent opening. Next slide, please. In the longer term, we strongly support the town's desire to reconstruct the primary intersection, and we provided feedback on 3 alternatives that they shared with us with an eye towards bicycle and pedestrian safety. In a follow-up check-in with the town that we had last week, we were also pleased to hear that there are many families that are in fact choosing to walk to school. So I just want to say thank you to Marzi Galaska and the rest of the team at Swampscott for inviting us to support children walking and rolling and building hopefully lifelong habits. With that, I will turn it back to Shravanti for our last study. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. So Town of Rentham requested us to evaluate traffic patterns on Haas Street, especially truck traffic. Next slide, please. Haas Street is a town-accepted local street that runs north-south and connects Washington Street to the south and Thurston Street to the north. Thurston Street is a town-accepted urban minor arterial that runs east-west and connects Washington Street to Rentham Center. And Washington Street, also known as Route 1, is a state-owned urban principal arterial that runs north-south and is part of the National Highway System. The posted speed limit of Haas Street is 30 miles per hour, Thurston Street is 30 miles per hour, and Washington Street is 55 miles per hour. Indian Head Road and Arrowhead Road are 2 cul-de-sacs on Haas Street. Next slide, please. So town staff shared that they received complaints from residents regarding truck traffic and the cut-through traffic speeding through Haas Street. Some considerations shared by town include either making Haas Street a dead end at a location such that there is residential access from Thurston Street and commercial access from Washington Street, or getting a truck exclusion for Haas Street. Next slide, please. Some existing conditions to highlight include that Haas Street has varying width, that is, it narrows near Washington Street while it widens near Thurston Street. And there is an elevation and grade difference throughout Haas Street. Next slide, please. Similar to Hamilton and Ipswich, we collected average weekday traffic volume, peak hour turning moment counts, and speed data for the study area. Volume and speed data were collected at 2 locations on Haas Street. One is south of Thurston Street and another one south of Arrowhead Road. And turning moment counts were collected at the intersection of Haas Street and Thurston Street. It is interesting to note that there is more traffic traveling southbound when compared to northbound on Haas Street. Since truck traffic on Haas Street was raised as a major concern, we also reviewed the data for that, and we noticed that the traffic volume and classification data recorded for 48 hours indicated only 2 trucks traveling northbound on Haas Street, which continued westbound on Thurston Street. To justify a truck exclusion zone, trucks need to be at least 5% of the total traffic on Horse Street. However, here trucks make up only 0.2% of total traffic. And hence, this is not enough to justify a truck exclusion. The average speed at both these locations were also within the speed limit. However, the 85th percentile data indicates that there is speeding on Horse Street. The difference in grade and width along Horse Street could be factors for speeding. Next slide, please. Short-term recommendations include reducing the posted speed limits to 25 miles per hour on Horse Street. We recommend that the town coordinates with navigation applications to not recommend Horse Street as a possible route to get to Rentham Center, and to install better signages such as flashing stop signs and school bus related signages on Horse Street. To consider clearing overgrown vegetation from time to time for better visibility, especially near the intersections, are some of the short-term recommendations. Next slide, please. For longer-term recommendations, we recommend assessing the width of Horse Street to align it to a uniform width throughout. Horse Street can be dead-ended north of the commercial lot on Horse Street, such that there is residential access from Thurston Street and commercial access from Washington Street. We support this consideration by the town. We also recommend coordinating with MassDOT and other entities on Washington Street project, that is Route 1 project. So here on the slide, the image on the right is a conceptual figure of the recommendations that were discussed so far. And this graphic may be updated based on the comment that we received from the town after the review of the report. So this sums up all our 4 community transportation technical assistance project presentations. And I will now pass it back to Ronak. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle and Travanti, for summarizing these 4 studies. I know that was a lot of information, but as I mentioned, the focus of this presentation is not so much on the projects themselves, but rather to highlight the variety and diversity of the projects that we can assist with at the MPO. Next slide, please. So where do we go from here? So already we have started receiving requests for the upcoming federal fiscal year. We have had a request to collect bike and pet count data and look at travel behavior. We have received a request to assist a municipality to develop a bike pet plan. And we have received another request where we are exploring how flooding can impact roadway infrastructure. Now, something that I mentioned in the beginning is that right now the program is set up in a way where it's reactive to requests. So we receive requests from municipal partners and we evaluate the feasibility of responding to those requests, and we take on projects. Internally, we're trying to work on developing a new program structure where we adopt a more proactive approach, and hopefully we'll have more updates for you soon as that process moves forward. And one question that some of you may be wondering is that, well, where do we go with these projects? Are they going to sit on our web pages and our digital shelves? Well, that is not going to be the case. With our new SS4A demonstration grants, we will be using our technical capacity to get involved and lead more quick build implementation projects, and the technical work that we've been doing through these projects in particular are going to help inform our work on those quick build implementation projects. And for these 4 projects in particular, I'm very pleased to report that several of our short-term recommendations have been approved by the Hamilton Select Board. So the town of Hamilton is moving forward with several of our recommendations. And in Swampscott, we're exploring the possibility of some follow-up engagement activities with the parents and school-going children. And Marzi's team is also looking at grant applications to support some of the work that we have recommended, in particular through MassDOT's local bottleneck reduction program, as well as the Safe Routes to School program. Thank you for your time and attention. I would be happy to take any questions regarding the program. If you have questions that are more related to the specific projects themselves, I would love to give Kyle and Travanti the opportunity to respond to those questions.
Thank you, Ronak. Very, very good presentation. Any questions or comments at this time? David Kozis.
Yeah, thank you. The project that jumped out at me right away was it Swampscott, I think. We're always trying to think about ways to encourage people to park a little bit away from a school and walk from there. It doesn't seem like it works out. Typically, whenever there's like actually still access to the school building, even if it's extremely congested, it seems like that's, what the parents want to do. And so I guess I'm wondering, is there anything that the town has done to physically like block access or limit access to the local streets? Or is it that parents could drive all the way to the school, but they're choosing to go to the synagogue instead? And also how far is the walk? So thank you.
I can take this one, and thank you. Great questions. So what the town has found, and again, the school's only been open for a few weeks, so this is all early stages and could definitely be subject to change, especially as the weather gets a little colder. But what the town has found is that they have seen significant amounts of parents parking and walking to the school, ironically not from the synagogue. So they established a formal relationship with the synagogue, where they more or less secured, reserved some parking spaces. But what parents are doing is to the west of the study area, there is a large parking lot by the middle school where they see a lot of parents parking and walking their students from there along some quieter streets. In addition, they have, and just to keep the presentation brief, didn't include this, but they did make a lot of traffic pattern changes to the neighborhood roads north of the school, making a lot of them one way. This kind of organizes the traffic flow a little bit better. It does still get very congested, at least so far. But that congestion is over such a short stretch of neighborhood roads that it really does encourage the parking and walking where possible. Hope that.
Thank you, Cal. Sandy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this was a really great presentation. I appreciate what you're doing with the program, and especially the proactive approach to finding more projects. I don't really have specific comments on the projects, but kind of thematically, I noticed that both the Sharon and the Swampscott projects focused on school areas. I'm super happy to see that. And to kind of follow up on one of the proposed annual meeting topics that Tegan mentioned earlier, and to respond a bit, I think, to David's comment, I want to kind of zoom out on that theme of school access, and make sure that folks here at the regional forum are familiar with some of the recent research about school location and kind of mode share. I'm going to drop a cool article that was in the Atlantic recently in the chat here. And really, there's been a lot of research on how location of school has a lot of influence on how people are reaching that, and the decline of kids reaching school by any mode other than cars. And I wonder if going forward, we might think about situating some of this work and MassDOT's excellent kind of Safe Streets to School work in the context of broader land use decisions about school location and how we can better integrate that into the transportation planning process. So I think there's a lot we could work on together there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Lynn Diggins?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What an excellent comment, Sandy. So I have a request, a quick comment, a quick question. The request is, can we get the Rentham study as part of the materials? It wasn't included, and I love to read these things because I've learned so much from reading them, and it's always worth a while. And the comment is your thoroughness. The chicken at play sign, kind of chuckle out of that, but also the fact that you just listed all the signs was pretty impressive. And my question, there was a mention, this is on the Ipswich study, I think, on Goodhue Street. It seems like the proponents wanted an exploration of making Goodhue or one of the streets a one-way street, and you didn't do it. And I was wondering why. You gave like the squaring off solution, but was there any reason that you didn't explore making it one way?
I can take this, Len. Thank you for your comment, Len. So just to give you a little bit about like Rentham, yes, we will definitely post it on our website pretty soon. The memo was under review by the town, so we just wanted to wait to get their comments. And this presentation was put together before receiving the comments, so there could be some changes in the final recommendations that will be posted on the website. I just want to let you know that. The memo will be posted pretty soon, and I'm happy to let you know once it is on the website. So your question about Hamilton and Ipswich. So we did look into, the traffic volume data for Goodhue Street, and we did consider whether making Goodhue Street a one-way is a good option. But unfortunately, given that the volume shows that there is equal amount of traffic on both these ways. So even if Goodhue Street is made one way, there is going to be cut through traffic on the other direction. That is one of the reasons why we did not consider making Goodhue Street one way, and the other reason is that it would impact the snow and emergency services. Their typical routes did not align with the one-way, making one-way street. So these were like the couple of reasons why we did not consider making it one way.
Thank you for a very informative response. I appreciate it.
Hannah?
Hi, I hope that this is okay, just given it's still one of my newer roles. Stepping away from my professional position on the MBTA advisory board and just speaking on a personal level, also as a select board member in the town of Sharon, I just want to say thank you. As someone who drives that area, it is one of the things that people consistently post on social media about in terms of just the traffic flow, or people simply not understanding what a rotary is or how a rotary works, and also just a lot of the improvement in terms of the bikeability around town. So I certainly appreciate seeing this on a personal level, and please feel free to also reach out at any point. But all of these projects, I think, are really important, and it's great to see the thorough presentations.
Thank you. That is actually really helpful to hear. So thank you so much. Ranak?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah, for that comment. All credit goes to the town of Sharon, of course, as well as the multimodal planning and design team staff who worked on that project. And I just wanted to leave all of you with one parting statement. It is that we would love to get your help in your professional and personal capacities to generate more awareness about this program. If you could spread the word in your communities with your partners and the folks you work with in your workplaces, that we are available as a resource to help with, as you can see, a wide variety of projects.
Steve Olenoff.
All right, well, we're on personal stuff. So I grew up in Swampscott, in that area, in that neighborhood. And there's just no way anyone's going to park at the synagogue and walk to that school. It's just convoluted. It's just, you go looking at the map and you can see that absolutely no one's going to do that. Also in Sharon, because I go through there every now and then, even if you know how a rotary works, when you get to that one, you have no idea what's going on there. So that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. An excellent presentation. And please, as Ranak said, please do spread the word. Good work being done, and they're looking to do more of it. Thank you so much, guys. Next item on the agenda is parking in bike lanes, strategies for safety and prevention. Kyle, you're up again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, my name is Kyle Casiglio. You may remember me from such presentations as CPTA. The Parking in Bike Lanes Strategies for Safety and Preventions is a UPWP study, was approved on the January 18th board meeting with a budget of $20,000. What we did here is essentially a literature review, series of case studies, and some outreach into national best practices and how to prevent people from obstructing bike lanes with motor vehicles. If I can get the next slide, please. So we'll go over today is a little bit of background on the study, why we did it, where the sources of obstruction are coming from, what the impacts of these are on people who actually use the bike lane. We'll talk about the interventions that we found, some best practices and how to prevent these from happening, a little bit about the outreach we did to different communities, and finally, some of the recommendations we have for municipalities and the region. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this study? One of the big things that's been taking off over the last several years is an increase in bike trips in our region, a 35% increase from 2019 to 2022. And that increase in bike trips is in large part because of an increase in bike lanes and bike share programs across the region. Of course, we're all probably familiar with the big expansion of blue bikes. And in municipalities, both inside and outside the inner core, we've seen a lot of increase in bike lane mileage, both traditional bike lanes and buffered bike lanes. Unfortunately, there is a big safety risk posed by obstructions to these bike lanes. If people are expecting to use them and expecting them to be clear, obstructions can be sudden, unexpected, and force dangerous maneuvers for both people using the bike lanes and people using the general travel lanes that are parallel to them. If I get the next slide, please. So where are these obstructions coming from? Who's doing it? Well, what we found in the literature is that it's primarily commercial vehicles. While they do not make up a majority of vehicles on the road in terms of the amount of time that a bike lane is obstructed, they do make up a disproportionate amount of the offenders. Now, where this is happening is typically driven by demand, in that an area that has more areas for commercial traffic, more stores, restaurants, destinations where people might be taking rideshare to. These are the areas most likely to be affected. Now, commercial vehicles are not the only sources of this. Car doors from personal automobiles are found to actually be about a third of all bicycle vehicle collisions. This might be a traditional bike lane that is adjacent to parking that does not have any buffer in between the bike lane and the parking. Someone opens their door, it can be very sudden. We've probably all heard of dooring in the past. So this is a major source of obstruction as well. Utility and government maintenance work is also an issue. The bike lane is typically one of the first areas that's seen as okay to be blocked. And unlike when a pedestrian facility is obstructed, there's typically no accommodation or detour provided for the bicycle. The bicycle is just expected to merge into the general travel lane. What all these have in common is really the ease of obstruction. As we'll see in a bit, it's just quite an easy offense to get away with. Most bike lane mileage is not buffered or protected in any way, making it an easy thing to do for a few minutes and feel like you're not making a big problem for anyone. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, it is a big problem for the people that are actually using the bike lane. The biggest impact here is on the safety of bike lane users. Making an unanticipated merge, what we found is that over 80% of people, when they encounter an obstruction in the bike lane, are going to move into the general travel lane as opposed to stopping, getting on the sidewalk, or anything like that. What this does is it leads to an increase in collisions. A obstructed bike lane is the most common environmental factor in a bicycle car collision. And a dark irony in this is that the commercial community, someone who's making a delivery on a bicycle, is far more likely to be impacted by this, to suffer from a collision, than just a regular bike lane user. Another impact we see are route diversions. People who use bike lanes are willing to make a significantly longer trip to go out of their way if they feel that they will not be likely to experience an obstruction. So for example, if you have a bike lane that you know is typically blocked, people are more likely to go out of their way, just avoid it altogether and add time to their trip. And what both of these things do is it suppresses ridership. People want to feel safe when they're traveling. That's a pretty reasonable expectation. If you have a low risk threshold, you don't want to encounter situations where you might have to unexpectedly swerve into a travel lane, unexpectedly dodge a car door, anything like that. Next slide, please. So after looking at the sources and the impacts of bike lane obstruction, we did some outreach on a national level to driver communities and to people who use bike lane bicyclists. Next, please. So when we talked to bicyclists, what we found, and this is primarily in the Boston region that this outreach was done, is that there's a sense that obstruction of bike lanes is ubiquitous, that it happens all over the place. It's very common. Over 80% of people said that they encounter an obstruction in the bike lane at least some of the time when they are biking around the region. They also communicated that they feel that there is a lack of enforcement, that enforcement is either ineffective or that it's not a priority for enforcement agencies, that basically it's something that people can get away with, that no one's caring about their concerns, their issues. We did find that confrontations with drivers are rare. The majority of people cycling are not actually confronting the person that's obstructing the bike lane about it. When they do, they find that most of the time they just get ignored, that actual confrontations that rise to shouting or violence are very rare. And frequently people did express that they are willing to divert their route in order to avoid somewhere where they expect a bike lane to be obstructed. Next, please. So we also reached out to drivers, and in particular, what we did was reach out to commercial drivers, both gig workers and legacy carriers such as UPS, FedEx. What we found from them is that they typically experience an unavailability of legal parking. Most people are not willing to park far from their destination if they're making a delivery, and that parking where they're trying to deliver is very frequently just unavailable. They agreed with the cycling community that there is a lack of enforcement. Many of them said that it is very rare or even something that has never happened to them, that they've been penalized or even confronted about them parking in the bike lane. They also expressed a perceived lack of impact, that what they're doing isn't a big deal, that, you know, a bicyclist can just go around. It's not really a problem. And finally, they all agreed, whether it be a gig worker or a legacy carrier, that there is no discouragement from this practice from the employer side. There is no penalty, even if they get a ticket. If it's a gig worker, it's just on them to take care of it, but there's no penalty for it. If it's a legacy carrier, most of them find the practice is that the employer will actually pay for the parking ticket as a cost of doing business. Next slide, please. So what do we do about this? Well, we looked at a series of interventions that are deployed all across the country. These can basically be categorized into 3 different groups. We have design-based interventions, block the obstruction from happening in the first place. Enforcement-based interventions, you know, discouraging it from happening. Or policy-based, which is addressing the source of the obstruction before it ever happens. Next slide, please. So the first group that we'll take a look at are design ones. These are probably the most straightforward. Next slide, please. You're probably all familiar with a buffered bike lane. What this is essentially going to do is prevent someone from placing a motor vehicle into the bike lane in the first place. There are a lot of ways of doing this. We have a few examples here, but this is by no means comprehensive. You can use planters, concrete barriers, bollards, flex posts. You can even use parked cars. Many ways to actually prevent this from happening. Next slide, please. However, this is not a universal solution. All of these buffered bike lanes have entrances or exits, which are susceptible to being blocked. Heavier vehicles, such as maintenance ones, can go over something like a small concrete barrier or go right through a flex post. What we did found, a little bit surprisingly, is that a protected bike lane, while it is only 25% as likely to be obstructed by a motor vehicle as an unbuffered bike lane, it is significantly more likely to be blocked by a pedestrian, someone walking their dog, something like that. And also in a region such as ours, where we have many old legacy roads, they can be spatially constrained, and there's not always going to be room to put a buffer or a barrier of some sort. Next slide, please. So all of these design solutions need to be paired with other solutions. Now we'll look at enforcement, discouraging the obstruction from happening. Next slide, please. So there are several strategies that cities are trying. First of all, we should be reviewing the existing policies we have around enforcement. Philadelphia, for example, there was a great article that looked at how they give a 20-minute grace period for any parking violation. Well, most bike lane obstructions are 5 minutes or less. And so no matter how many cyclists are being blocked during that 5-minute period, they're not going to get penalized for it, even if there does happen to be an enforcement officer on scene. So it's important to make sure that the policies are consistent with the scale and scope of the problem. Putting enforcement agents on bicycles is something we've seen getting people to use the infrastructure that they're responsible for enforcing the rules of, helps them identify the problem. It also puts people on that, slower scale, and you're not focused on driving so much as what's happening right in front of you, the thing that you're responsible for protecting. Crowdsourcing data, a lot of municipalities are basically doing an open source network where people can take a picture of an obstruction, such as what you see here, report it, and even if that's not directly leading to a penalty, it does help planners and enforcement agents identify hotspots and areas that need intervention. Some cities, such as Houston and New York, have initiated citizen reporting that then gets reported to officials for the actual enforcement itself. Houston's doing this with handicapped parking spaces, New York with idling vehicles. Both of them have found significant success with this. And automated enforcement is something that's being expanded across the country. California, for example, just opened up their bus lane enforcement cameras to cover bike lanes as well. We have local examples of this as well, with Somerville using safety sticks, Bridgeport, Connecticut using the same. Next slide, please. Enforcement, like all of these strategies here, is unfortunately still not a silver bullet. There's always concerns about equity. Is enforcement being done equitably? Are neighborhoods receiving different levels of enforcement than others? When we talk about automated enforcement, privacy is, of course, a concern. Do we have robust privacy measures to make sure that data is protected and not publicly available? In terms of citizen-based enforcement, there's also a public safety and accountability question. People are much less likely to confront a uniformed officer, someone who's responsible for enforcing, rather than someone who's just a random citizen taking a picture. And at the end of the day, enforcement is a reactive approach. It's addressing something that is already happening. So it's not preventing the issue from happening right now, maybe in the future, but the issue has already happened. So we want to mix in, again, some other solutions to try and prevent this from happening before we need to enforce. Next slide, please. And this is really where the policy interventions come in. Next slide, please. So since freight and commercial traffic is the disproportionate offender, a lot of the policy considerations are on how to better facilitate freight trips. The biggest one of the most successful that we found is encouraging off-hour freight as an overnight delivery. Getting freight being delivered when there's more legal parking available and when people are less likely to be using the road infrastructure in the first place. New York has had a lot of success with an incentive program, education, and outreach to businesses to encourage off-hour delivery. And this is something that, frankly, most commercial and freight shippers love. They would rather be doing the deliveries in these overnight hours. Designated pickup and drop-off zones are something we're probably all familiar with at Logan Airport, but this is something that can be done at the neighborhood level. Boston recently did a pilot program with a designated pickup and drop-off zone. People were found to be pretty compliant with it, particularly the rideshare program. And while there was some confusion experienced, this is something that as people get more adapted to and have come to expect can eliminate that confusion. Finally, increasing meter rates is a market-based solution, developing smart loading zones where people can reserve time. And frankly, I would encourage everyone to take a look at the memo. There are far more. This is just a summary of some of the highlight interventions, but there are many ways that we can continue to innovate different practices to encourage people to not block the bike lane. Next slide, please. Now, these policies, most of them are carrot oriented. There's few sticks involved, which is where the enforcement piece comes in. There typically has to be some kind of enforcement component that goes along with it. And because demand for curb space is so disaggregated, there is no silver bullet that's going to address everyone's problems. It really does need to be a blend of approaches. And finally, again, equity is, of course, a concern. Are we making sure that these are being implemented in an equitable manner, or some neighborhoods, some areas getting favorable treatment? Next slide, please. So finally, our recommendations. And again, this is just a summary. I encourage you to read the memo to check out all of our recommendations. But bicycle enforcement units, getting people using the infrastructure was something we found to be really effective. Encouraging the legalization of automated enforcement that really takes the issue out of the hands of individual people having to be there at the time, and getting the population involved. One of the biggest problems we have is that we don't have good data on where bike lanes are being obstructed. So the more that we can crowdsource that from users is going to be very helpful in prioritizing where to implement these interventions. Next slide, please. In the longer term, of course, ideally, we would love to have more protected bike lanes. And that's something I think that we heard from the outreach earlier in this board meeting. Developing a citizen reporting process. This is something that the city of Houston's been doing successfully for 30 years. We haven't seen a significant issue in confrontations between offenders and reporters. And it's something that they've been able to do without any type of bounty program as well, just a volunteer-based program. Finally, neighborhood level pickup and drop-off zones can help increase predictability, and smart loading zones in high demand areas are going to be great for carriers to know that they're going to have a parking space available to them. Next slide, please. So thank you all very much for your time. And at this point, the chair for any questions or discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Any questions or comments for Kyle? Seeing none. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Lynn Dickinson.
Sorry. I know it's really late. I know it's really late, and I'm just going to put in a request, Kyle, because it's a great study. The advisory council generally likes to have a look, an extended period to discuss this. It'll probably be our last one of these because the advisory council we did advocate for this study. Our members were really interested in this study for the UPWP. So I think it'd be good if in one of the last two meetings it got to at least see the results of the study in detail. So I'll ask Ms. Jordan to reach out to you. Maybe we can come to our October meeting. Thank you.
I would love to. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Tom Bent.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Kyle, I'll be honest, I didn't get through all 200 and something pages of this, but I did get through a fair amount of it. I thought very good report, very clear. And I think and I'm sure a lot of us could talk about this all day long, right? But some of the things that we've seen here in Somerville is, and you did touch on it, is we've inherited narrow streets, right? So that's a big issue because because of a recent bike lane that was put in on Summer Street, which runs from Union Square to Davis Square, narrow thoroughway though, and what I see there is, and it's not even finished yet, but like the U.S. Postal Service, there's apartment buildings that have 200-300 units in them that were built in the early 1900s that have no parking at all, right? And so even for the post office to park anywhere near the building, there just isn't any parking anymore. So when they designed the bike lane, they didn't really say, okay, where our delivery is going to be, where's the post office going to be able to drop off mail? So, it's funny, I got a picture on my phone. I'm driving home a few weeks ago, and basically the U.S. postal van just drove right up through the bike lane onto the sidewalk, but the other issue, you have your Amazon and all those people, but the other issue that I'm seeing more and more of, and it was in the report a little bit, was about like places like Uber and Uber Eats. They're just stopping right in the road and just waiting for, whoever they just texted to come down and get them. And like you say, it might only be 5 minutes, but at rush hour, it's causing major disruptions. And so it's issues like that we're seeing, I'm sure, not only in Somerville, but everywhere in the inner core. So it's just trying to figure that out. But I think Somerville has done the smart stick in Davis Square. I know some people don't like it. Some people, think it's great. But that's that's an expensive proposition for cities to put, and like you say, to be equitable about it, you can't just put it in the squares. So, but I think this is a great thing to get the discussion rolling. And I'd love to, and I'm sure Brad, I know couldn't be here today, but I'm sure he'd like to talk to you more about this also once I get a chance to get through the whole report. But thank you.
Jen Rowe.
Yeah, thank you. Also acknowledging that I'm getting hungry. So I won't. I have a lot I could say about this. I guess maybe one just thing is that I would love to help find other ways to elevate this work and kind of bring it to other audiences. Because I think I was really impressed by the ability to kind of synthesize a lot of complexity. It seems like a simple thing, like something in the bike lane, but there's actually so many different, causes and sociological to like physical aspects of it. And particularly wanted to appreciate this is changing over time. We've seen, with the growth of delivery services, with the changes to our street environments and the new types of facilities we've out there. So the amount of kind of published literature on this, I think you did an amazing job finding what there was out there, but also kind of being able to supplement it with other forms of outreach. And to Ken's earlier point, amazing that you were able to, find ways of connecting with stakeholders that don't often, get involved in transportation work, like the delivery drivers. I will encourage folks to read the thing. It's actually the main content is just 25 pages. I had to kind of give a disclaimer when I sent it around to folks on the Boston team. So don't let the long PDF page kind of deter you. Just a few things that I wanted to note because I didn't see them, particularly mentioned. Boston actually did at one point have a parking enforcement by bicycle. It was a very small program. It didn't run very long. I've been told that the reason it stopped was actually challenges maintaining the bicycles. Now we have a city bike mechanic. So we're actually talking pretty seriously about maybe returning that. So if anyone else is interested in that sort of thing, would love to connect further on that. The other kind of small bit that I didn't see mentioned but wanted to bring to the conversation is that one of our the challenges we encounter with blocking of protected bike lanes is our inability at the moment to have them narrow enough that they can't exclude a car because of the needs to plow those spaces and have street sweepers be able to move through them. So that's a very active issue we're trying to figure out something around. Everyone is like, oh, just put a flex post there in the middle, and we're not able to do that operationally right now. So maybe I just wanted to bring that up specifically because it may be potentially a role that the region could help with. How do we source more of the types of vehicles that could plow and sweep in narrow spaces? And certainly it's something we'd love to brainstorm with others. So thank you so much. And I look forward to talking about this further in another time and enjoying lunch now.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Kyle. Excellent presentation. Next item on our agenda is member items. Jen, I think you have one, don't you?
Yes, thank you for the cue. I just wanted to notify board members that we've requested a letter of support from the MPO board for the City of Boston application to the Reconnecting Communities pilot program, a USDOT program. And we're applying for the Mattapan Square portion of the larger Blue Hill Ave project, which you may be ringing some bells because we brought it to you all in the spring, or and the MBTA actually. Run it to you all in the spring. I am happy to take any questions about that now or offline.
Thanks. Any other member items at this time? Seeing none. First, I'd like to thank everybody for hanging in. It was a relatively long meeting, but it was really interesting, and it's really important that staff get the chance to talk to us all about all the great work they do. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn? And please state your name for the record. Lynn Diggins.
Diggins, who wholeheartedly agrees with you, Mr. Chair. Motions to adjourn.
Thank you. Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, I'll second that motion, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And again, thank you to staff for some really good presentations. And without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next meeting.